Hi, today let us learn about components. So the topics of discussion for today are components, and we'll see how we can create components using Angular CLI, and we'll discuss about multiple components, for example, like nested components, and we'll talk about @input annotation that we use for components, component works, and what a component is. So component is basically a class which helps in facilitating data to the HTML template. If you can look at this particular diagram, component facilitates data to the HTML template and component receives data from HTML, and it passes data to service and receives data from the service. So let's see an example. So I'm in our project, Angular2 beginner project that we created in our last tutorial. So Angular CLI creates some classes, some components for us when you create the project itself. For example, all these app.files are created by Angular CLI for me. So let's take a look at the component. So app.component.ts is the TypeScript component file. So let's go through this line by line. So import. So an import statement to import the component tag. So component is a part of Angular core module. So we have to import component tag first to use it. And then @component is the annotation used for the class app component. This particular class acts as a component just because you are annotating this class with this particular component called @component. And @component takes some attributes as inputs. For example, selector is one of the attribute, and you can give any name you want for this particular selector, and this particular name will act as a user-defined tag for this particular component and the template. And template URL is the HTML page where you will write all your HTML tags in. And every component is associated with one template, as shown in the diagram here. So every component is associated with a HTML template. So this HTML template is this. And style URL app.component.cs. So if you want to style your HTML page with a particular CSS, you can actually define all the styles in app.component.cs for this particular HTML. And you're naming your class called, you're naming it as app component, and you have a variable inside this called title, and the value assigned to it is app works. Let's see how this value gets displayed in this particular HTML here. So let's go into this HTML. So if you see, we just have 3 lines of code here, a h1 tag and then double flower braces with title as the variable. So basically this value, which is embedded within these flower brackets, will be treated as a component variable and gets displayed on the view. So let me run the project. Okay, so to run the project, you just need to type ngserve. Okay, so it's all ready now. So let me open my Safari, localhost. So if you see this here, so that's how this app works value is getting displayed. So that app works is actually here. Okay, so let me change the value here. And I'll restart the project. it worked. So now you are seeing one along with AppWorks. So that's how you can assign variables from a component to HTML. Now let us see how to create a new component using Angular-Cli. So right now I'm in my project folder. All that you have to do is ng generate component. Let me name my component as summary or something, or I can name it as, for example, dashboard. So I have 4 files created in my project under src app folder. It automatically creates a folder by the name of the component that I mentioned here, and it creates 4 files inside that folder. One is a CSS, the other one HTML, and this is a test file. So if you want to write any of your unit tests, you can write all those unit tests under dashboard.component.spec.ts for this particular component. And I have a TS file. This is the main component file where your class resides. So now let me go back into Visual Studio Code and open dashboard folder. So let me make some quick changes to this code here. So let's add a new variable. I want to display my name on the screen. So I have created a variable called name, and let's display the ID also. You can have it as a number if you want. And I don't have any value assigned to them yet. I can assign value to them here if I want to. For example, 1, Sandeep. I'll talk about ng in it in a while. So let me display these values in my dashboard component HTML file. So dashboard works, ID, name. Now, how will my dashboard component.html gets displayed on the web page? So every time you will only see AppWorks if you don't make any further changes here. You will never see your dashboard HTML page. So I'll try to link dashboard HTML with app HTML. So how will I link it? So using the selector. As I said, selector will act as a user-defined tag in your HTML. So all that I'll do here is I'll do this. Let's restart the project. Or maybe it's not required. Let's see if it's required to restart. Seems like I have to restart. Oh, I have turned it off. Okay. So I'm turning on the live server. For some reason, it keeps saying the port is already in use. Let me open the terminal again. Okay, if you see, when I run ngserve, it automatically starts an instance of live server. So your project gets deployed in live server. Okay. Okay, it worked. So that's how you can embed one component in another component. So basically these are like nested components, a component inside a component. So let me make the UI look much better. So I'll add an input type as text, and I'll talk about ng model in a minute. Let's say this is my ID. Okay. Okay. So what I'm trying to do here is my UI will have two text boxes. One text box will take ID as the input, and the second text box will take my name as the input. And I'll try to display those two values here. Okay. So let me enter the value. If you see, my values didn't show up here. Instead, it's showing the default values that I have assigned in my component. For example, let's go back into, okay, I'll close these dashboard components. Okay, so it is showing ID as 1 and name as Sandeep. ID as 1 and name is Sandeep. But I entered my ID as 2 and name as none. Isn't it supposed to show these values here instead of the default values that I have assigned to it? Let's see why it's not doing that. I'll try to make a quick change to this code. Okay. Now let's see what happens. Okay. So the moment page loaded, ID got the default value 1 and name got the default value Sandeep, and ID is 1 and name is Sandeep. Let me change this to 12. See what happens here. It changed to 12. So both are linked right now. And same thing with Sandeep. So that's how you can actually link your HTML with your component. So now let's talk about ng model. So ng model basically facilitates you to link your template with your component. So for example, in this case, ID is a variable in my component, and name is also a variable in my component. So I'm trying to link ID and name to this input text box using ng model. So how about these brackets here? So this bracket here represents data flowing from the view into the component, whereas the square brackets represent data flowing from the component into the view. So I'll create a separate tutorial for ng model and all the ngs. So you can actually go through about ng model in detail in my next tutorial. So for now, I'll just try to keep it simple, just for the sake of easy understanding. So that's how you can basically link your component in HTML. Now, let me take a bigger problem. So I want to pass data from one component into the other component. For example, let's say I have nested components. In this case, my app component and dashboard component. I want to pass some data from my app component into the dashboard component. How can I do that? So we'll use @input annotation. So for example, this is my app component. So if you remember, app dashboard is a dashboard component. So I took this value from the selector in my dashboard component. So I have included this selector in app component HTML. And let me make some changes to my dashboard component. So my intention basically here is to pass the ID and name from app component into dashboard component. Let's see how I'm going to do that. So I already have ID and name variables in my dashboard component. So all that I have to do now is to import. And I'll not assign any values to this by default. And I'm printing ID and name here. Okay. So now I want to pass ID and name. So when I type any value into the input text box here, that value should automatically go into the child component here. So this is what I do to pass a value. Let's see how this works. if you see, this is my dashboard component and this is my app component. So already you can see what's happening here. So I have some default values assigned in my app component. Let me go back into the code and show you. So in my app component, I have some default values assigned to ID and name. So those two values are already showing up here, and even in my dashboard component. So my dashboard component started taking the values from app component. Let's see if it's true. So as I type the values here, the values are getting displayed on app component, and then app component is passing the values to my dashboard component just because we used at input annotation on top of ID and name variables. So let's see about how the name works. So same thing with the name. How components works. Thank you so much for watching this tutorial.